Hey everybody, welcome back. We are Tabletop Misfits, and tonight, of course, is Tavern Talks. Now, normally, I'd be dressed like a tavern owner, and I'd be getting ready to prepare a wonderful story. But instead, I figured we'd change it up a little bit. So tonight, I grabbed friends. Hi, friends!
Hello.
All right, so tonight, we are talking all things Game Master. So we're going to go over world building, combat design, social encounters, anything that you have questions of. Make sure you're dropping those in the comments throughout the entire session, and we're at that moment going to stop and answer those questions. Well, I wouldn't say at the moment, but as soon as we get the end of a conversation, then we'll stop and answer the next question. Tonight is all about that. So our goal is to get all of your questions that you have, either if you're becoming a game master, you've thought about picking up the mantle, or you're a seasoned game master and maybe you have something that's just kind of bugging you about your game. Maybe we can help. I don't know, but before I do, let me introduce my wonderful friends around the table tonight. So first off, we have Robert Walker. He is the owner of Dungeons, Dragons, and Psychology podcast. Definitely go check them out. Next, so this is all done on Zoom for me, so I have no clue where everybody's at. So if I point somewhere and it's wrong, it's not my fault. It's Zoom. Next, I have Tim, who is the game master and creator for Knights and Nerds podcast, which is also over on all the podcast places. And he's currently running like 2 or 3 shows. I'm only keeping up with one. But it's amusing, it's fun. If you like time travel, go watch that show. And finally, but not least, Morgan Dangerfield, otherwise known as the Game Master for Heroes of Evermore. And he is over on Instagram mostly because but I will tell you, his in-person tables are through the roof. They're incredible. They come with spectacular little science projects and all sorts of fun stuff. So definitely go check him out. So, guys, welcome to the table.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for having us.
Before I start, you guys have anything to say?
I'm excited to be here. Looking forward to getting the perspective of a bunch of different DMs other than myself. So,
yeah, definitely. And James, what you had put in that little intro on Insta, any new DMs out there, that's hopefully we can field some questions that would really help them out. Because I remember being a new DM and it was just, it was an interesting learning curve. So having this might cut through some things.
Oh, definitely. And I've got a couple questions already, because I did before we started, I jumped on our Discord a couple days ago and I put a message out to our Discord to let people know, like, hey, this is what we've got going on. And some questions started popping up. So I have a feeling we can at least start the conversation with these. So first question I've received is, how can you nuance a social situation other than you insult? Like, this is a hard way to explain this. Let me see if I can read this properly and not make it sound weird. How can you write situations of dialogue to make it flow naturally so that you're prepared? Anybody can start.
I think one of the things I typically do if I know that the party is going to have a conversation with a particular person who's like a quest giver, those sort of things I'll write out by having what are the pieces of information that the quest giver or the NPC that they're interacting with needs to convey to the party, and then what sort of things the party could say that would trigger a response that passes on that information. So, for example, if they need to tell them that the next place they need to go is the ancient ruins, and the party's talking about something in the tavern with the person, they could say, oh yeah, that's interesting. That looks like something I saw that another adventurer brought through from nearby ruins, So just kind of have things that will trigger whatever their talking point is and know what those things are ahead of time so you can sort of slip them in there.
about our other game masters? What are we thinking?
Morgan, you want to jump in?
Sure. Yeah. No, along the lines of being a game master, but also giving our players flexibility and freedom to do whatnot in the world. It's, unless you're running modules, it's an amazing homebrew. Oh, that's where I'm coming to fly, and throw that improv in there and be able to, but have backup, right? Like, we have a quest line in mind that we want them to go to, but if they want to go, like, steal a pirate ship and become pirates all of a sudden, like, okay, I'm gonna kind of shift my plot lines around, and when I throw that dialogue down of like a main quest line, I have that in mind, and if they don't want to follow it, okay, that's fine, I'll shift on the go. But like Robert said, kind of having it written down, especially NPCs and plot lines and stuff, to go off of as a foundation is key.
I think the only thing that I would really add on that is, like, if this is a semi-important NPC who, like, might be a recurring character where you want the dialogue to feel, really authentic, is you hit a couple big like the major points about, like, just running a character is, like, what Robert said, what do they know? What do they want? Like, as a character, every character wants something, and like a quirk, a certain way that they talk. And I think if you've got those three factors, I think it'll kind of come naturally.
Well, those are all really good points. There's a second portion to this, and this is something I'm curious about as well. And I think this is more of a world building side of the puzzle, but how can you write societies where everyone has magic, but yet there's still a firm hierarchy that might not be specifically surrounded by magic?
Can you repeat that one more time?
Sure. How can you write societies where everyone has magic, and yet there's still a firm hierarchy, even though there might not be magic within the hierarchy? Because if you think today's world, if there was a magician in any way, shape, or form in the level of fantasy worlds, they would own everything. Like, they would have no choice. So when everybody has this, and yet you still have people like fighters and paladins and rogues and things like that in those classes, why is it that not every fantasy world has those people in power only because they've got the most strength?
That's a tough question, because I think you're right. It's one of those things, like, whoever has the power becomes the leader, and if everyone has magic, to picture a leader that doesn't is pretty out there. I think the thing you would have to find is you're going to have some sort of backstory, or there has to be a lever of control, right? If they don't have magic, they need to have some other lever of control. Perhaps there's a class of people who are not affected by magic, and so all of this great power sort of just, they can brush it off and still be in charge, because all of that power that exists really means nothing to them. I mean, obviously magic dropping a block on their head would still kill them, but like direct fireballs or whatever, maybe they can just brush them off, and then that's their own sort of lever of control or magic. But I would say find something like that. Find something that gives them a believable lever of control, so that it's not just looking at the society going, this doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, you get like a collective belief that everybody buys into, like the divine right of kings, like succession, like that's the heir, so they inherit the throne. Like, it doesn't matter if they're like a terrible person, it's an objectively terrible leader. It's like, oh, well, they're next in line, so they get to wear the crown. It's like, but we don't apply that same logic to anyone else. It's like, oh, my doctor's son is going to, like, examine my prostate. Like, no, he hasn't even been to medical school, you guys. But like, yeah, if you have that kind of like central belief system that everybody buys into, like that, I could see something like a religion, a very powerful religion, like superseding magical power.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like as a new DM, also you could, if you wanted to, if you were just scratching the surface in world building, you could fall back on the race, the classes, right? Bard or Paladin are going to have like a smidge of magical power. So if you want to lean on that as a foundation, then you can grow from there. And like full wizards are going to have full magic abilities. And so maybe they lead more so, like wizards, sorcerers, main spellcasters. And then they can have their own covenants, like their own realms and their own societies themselves within that. And the more powerful ones would be running the more government powers. So could be good option.
No, those are all real good options. Only thing I can think of, and like I said, I'm probably not going to talk much because y'all are going to hit most of these points. I'm just going to share the questions and hopefully we keep this going. The only thing I can say on this is that you kind of got to think of the leadership quality that you're running into as well, because in a lot of cases, if you think, well, maybe magic isn't what drives the organization as a whole or the society as a whole. Maybe it is power. I mean, if you think about orcs, there's not really very many magical orcs, and even the magical orcs aren't really looked at the same way as the big hulking angry one, right? So basing it around where you want your society to grow, especially in world building, like large world building, you want to make sure that you're taking those mentalities to the max there. So a king, he might not have a lot of magic power, but he has an extremely high amount of influence to people who might, and vice versa. It's not always the king who has the magic, it's he can pull the string, and when he pulls the string, the magic flies. It's kind of that type of mentality. That's the only thing I can think of that might help with that, where it doesn't have to be magic.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. A really strong, charismatic leader, either who has followers who are powerful magic users, or just has enough people that love or respect or even fear them for whatever reason, that they can kind of keep things in line. I think that is definitely a workable option.
All right. I'm hoping these are really helping people as they start to build their societies and their world building, and that we're answering as many of these questions as possible. Let's see here. Our next question, and of course, toss your questions out in chat. I'm watching it like a hawk. Okay, here's an interesting one. Coming from our wonderful artist, what, if anything, do you feel is a requirement you need to include in a one-shot? So maybe you're preparing for a group of players that have never played before, and you want to give them an introduction to Dungeons and Dragons, but you know that this is not going to be the 6-year campaign that you really want to play. This is going to be a one-shot. So what would you want to see and make it almost as a requirement that you would need in order to make a one-shot work and work well?
I think you got to hit all three pillars: exploration, social interaction, and combat. That's where I'd start.
Yeah, I think for me, that's a great answer. It's definitely what you want to see. But I think the only thing I would ever require of a one shot is just of myself as a DM. I would just require that I find a way to make sure that everybody who's in that one shot has like an epiphany moment of, oh crap, I love this game. This is awesome. So like, however that has to happen, I think the only thing I would ever require is self-imposed.
Yeah, it's great. I actually researched my first one shot. I'm like, okay, what do I need to do? What do I need to throw in there? And I had it broken down on the table, like, because we run in person. And so each step, like there was good role play here, there was exploration, then they were getting into combat, then there was some work. It turned into an 8-shot. There were 8 sessions in this thing. So if I could give anyone advice, like if you really want a true one shot and not a multi-shot, then yeah, breaking it down, give yourself more time for combat. I actually put a timer, 2-minute timer per person for combat. I talked with the players first, made sure they weren't stressed out about stuff. A little tougher for newer players, but That was something that helped with the one shot facilitate that. But you guys, both of you nailed it on the head of what to include in there. So yeah.
The other
I mean,
thing is,
me
think of
personally,
time.
like I would kind of default to going to something that feels like a classic dungeon crawl, you know, with like the classic kind of like wizard's tower or the wizard's lair with like weird traps and weird puzzles, because like of course the wizard wants to like flex that he's smarter than everybody else, and you know, have that kind of weird stuff. I don't know, maybe that's just me.
No, like I said, the only thing I can think of that might help with this is keep it simple. Think of not a large campaign. Think of one item. Okay, I have one quest that has to get done. I need to dive into the wizard's lair and get the book and bring it back to this dude. That's it. That's all you need. And then you just want to make sure that you're adding those 3 pillars, as Tim said, to make sure that they're getting a full scope of what Dungeons and Dragons is, or what TTRPGs are in a storyteller standpoint. But otherwise, I think that's really all I would require from a game master if I was going to help them, is to make sure you're hitting combat, you're hitting some sort of connection with an NPC, and and then some exploration, which can either be a dungeon crawl, it can be traps, it can be storytelling. Any of those things, you just want to make sure that you're giving the best you can out of those. You want to flush those 3 things out as much as possible.
Yeah, one other thing that I do, I have like a sand hourglass. It's a 30-minute hourglass, and I mess with my normal campaign players, but I'll put that for a one shot on the side, so I know every 30 minutes if they're not progressing where they should be, maybe I'll move the plot line forward a little bit, so that way I can make sure I keep on track and hit all those points and move them along, and not forcing it, but just wrapping up whatever they're in right now. So, and then they don't know what it's for, so it messes with them.
I did that too. It wasn't for a one shot, but they had a session where it was downtime, and they were all in a festival, and it was a 3-hour game. So every hour, on the hour, something would shift within the festival, no matter where they were at going on in the festival. By the end, one of the guys died, but that was part of the idea, to start the next arc. But no, the hourglass is definitely a great idea, because it gives the visual. And who knows what kind of craziness is going through a player's head when they see that thing hit the end, and they're just like, you don't say a word, you just turn it right back over for another 30 minutes, and everybody's like,
yeah, just shift the music to like battle music for a second. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh, my bad, I hit the wrong button.
I pressed the space bar.
Getting ahead of myself.
No, those are real good points, and I think if you took those couple points and made it very simple for a brand new group of players, they're going to have a blast, and it's going to be able to follow that progression. Just make sure there's an ending. I mean, for a one shot, you've got to have an ending. You can't. I mean, you can cliffhanger it a bit so that they come back, especially if you're one of those people that are like, I want a one shot, but I really want to play more.
Mm-hmm.
So you finish up the quest that you put them on, but then you give them something kind of as a treat at the end of it to hopefully entice them to come back for the next one shot or the next series completely. All right, everybody good on that one? Any other comments on that one? No? All right, awesome. Let's see, next one. Oh, this is going to kind of go for everyone in different ways. So what are some inspirations from pop culture that you have taken when creating your worlds? And I know, I mean, I've listened to Tim's world for quite a long time. So, and I've been talking with Tim for a couple years now, and listened to quite a few of his episodes, and he has a very intricately designed world that has some unique perspectives, but anybody can start. What is some inspirations that you have taken for your worlds?
I mean, honestly, it's a trick question. I would say
Everything. Everything.
every movie you've watched, every video game. I mean, I've put stuff in from like PS2 video games to like a Lord of the Rings video game and something they enacted, just like little mechanics and things from movies, and even the world building aspect, good and evil plots, and what the bad guys are running, and then the people that they're running underneath them, and mini bosses. And God, I don't think any of my players are on the instant.
I was like, so maybe I need to focus fire this a little differently. So I guess we'll have to do it this way. Without giving any secrets away that could potentially affect one of your players, you'll have to share something about your world and then where you came up with the inspiration. Because this will kind of give people an idea of what they're looking at. And who wants to start?
I don't know if any of you have read any of the King Killer Chronicles, The Name of the Wind.
I have.
I sort of followed that. I built a whole campaign really around the backstory of the character and the idea of the traveling circus that he was in. I didn't go into like the main plot, but I still like his origin story and just built a campaign as off of that, which is it was a lot of fun. I mean, the characters are traveling around basically as gypsies, moving around the world and performing as like traveling bards, but also performing magic and learning all that kind of stuff. And it was a really cool springboard. But on that same note, you were asking just of where do you get inspiration from? Like I have a note on my phone, like a notepad on my phone that is just ideas to use in games. And it is a massive list. And every time I'm watching a movie, I'm reading a book, I'm listening to a podcast, if somebody says something really cool, if somebody uses a really unique accent, if they have a really creative like villain arc, like especially villains who you can like understand, like I will jot that in that. And then when I go to run a campaign or write a new NPC, I'll pull that up. And sometimes it's even just one line. Like when my wife was watching the show Bridgerton, I must have taken about 20 different like high aristocratic insults and threw them in there just to throw out using my players. But I mean, steal from everywhere. That's what I would say. Steal from anything that makes you laugh or draws your attention, because that's good stuff.
Yeah.
For my current campaign, I don't want to spoil anything, but there's a lot of weird stuff happening. Like the party is trying to track down this sort of magical shards of like meteorites that occasionally fall. And every time that they change hands, like something in the world changes, like certain people that they thought that they knew, like don't remember them, or people that they know will have remembered them doing things differently in the recent past that they have no memory of doing. So there's all this like weird stuff happening. And I kind of really got into that idea from watching the show on Netflix called Dark, which was super confusing, but like it was incredibly engaging. I don't know. I think that's all I can really say. It's just I wanted to go for that vibe. I wanted to capture that feeling.
Yeah, Dark is that's a unique show for sure. I watched like an episode of it and went, nope, not for me. Kept moving.
I love it. I've got two things.
Sure.
So I used a similar to Lord of the Rings, like alliances of the realm, right? There was a final battle in our campaign 1 and they needed help and assistance. And so, like the beacons of Minas Tirith are lit, kind of a vibe. Our adventurers were pretty much at the Elven Kingdom at the time, and they see it was what did I name it? Gosh dang it, just eluded me. But essentially I had like dwarves had smithed this like huge magnifying glass, which they would light like a sparkling energy, and it would shoot like a magnifying glass. So it was like a beam of light, right? It had a different spin, but that's essentially where I stole that. And it was the beacons of the Alliance, where all the Alliance member parties of good that were out there could support one another. So that was one that I brings, which I mean, what D&D campaign, if you're running traditional, doesn't
pull from those
Have a
those
foundation.
tropes, yeah.
Yeah. Game of Thrones, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Another one that I ran was a town that the party had gone off to, and there were like stone statues of people in the town. It was deserted, and they found out a beholder had taken over the main tower of the town, and it was a half elves, and so they found out that half elves could be experimented on. This beholder lord was had a dungeon underneath the tower and a trap door, and went down, and there was a chair there where they were getting experimented on. So it was kind of like taken from Frankenstein in essence, and there was like lightning coming from the top of the tower, that energy and power to the experimental table, and he was using like wolf's bane and some potions to try to create a werewolf army, and that was fun for the players to come upon. But I kind of stole that from Frankenstein a little bit, along the essence of creating something. So yeah.
So I'm going to kind of challenge some new game masters. Don't only look at something I heard a long time ago is look as far out as you can to find these things, because they make the best connections if somebody actually can figure it out. An example of that is in my previous campaign. This was before I started streaming. I had a character who was a tiefling who was kind of like the underbelly overlord, and I was really big into Blacklist at the time. So we had our own Red Reddington who was kind of moving the pieces around underneath, and one of the characters actually had so much influence that he would send messages to him every time they would go out on some sort of quest. He needed him to do something outside of everybody else for him specifically, and that was a really fun little nuance that connected. Nobody figured out who he was, but I was like, this is just great because he has knowings on everything without me having to really explain that. Oh well, he knows this person here and he knows that person. No, he knows everyone. This is part of his thing. The second one is I took a trope of vampires and werewolves and spun it. So the werewolves were actually the good people, the were animals, and the vampires were the ones that were controlling the city and telling humans, telling the other people of the city that the werewolves were bad. And then only in certain cases would people become missing, and they would pin it on the werewolves, where actually they were stealing them and draining them and creating creations and all that fun stuff. So yeah, definitely two things I would suggest is find an idea you really like and find a way to just tweak it just a little bit, and you'll find some really interesting things that you can bring out of that. For the gods, I almost thought you were trying to going with, and if I say this and it insults you, I apologize. Have you ever seen the movie Stardust?
No, you know what? But Sarah, one of the players, mentioned that. Isn't that a movie with like some kind of like fae type of like shenanigans happening? Or am I totally?
Kind of. It's got Robert De Niro in it. It's got a whole bunch of like random, like, but it's the idea that something hit the ground and they were going towards it, and every time they got close to it, something weird would happen, and I was like, this is what this sounds like. But no, yeah, definitely go check it out. If nothing else, it might give you some interesting ideas. That's all I'm asking.
But James,
it wasn't a great movie.
What you were describing there, like, it sounds almost exactly like when I was trying to figure out how to like write stories, or like generate ideas for stories. There was an author, and I can't remember his name, but like he had a lecture on YouTube, not Brandon Sanderson, but another fantasy author. And he had this method that he called list and twist. So he would like list like 20 or 30 things that like, these are all like things that I'm really interested in, like topics or like just ideas for encounters or whatever. And then he would like combine like 2 or 3 of them that don't really seem to go together and just find a way to like blend them together. So you kind of create something sort of new out of like a hybrid of existing ideas. I think it sounds exactly like what you were saying. Like find something that you're interested in and then tweak it.
Yeah. From the chat, first off, Realms of Role Playing, thank you. I'm sure Tim loves to see that you're enjoying the God's Eye and Campaign 2. And second of all, Shadow has another question. His question is, do you ever run your plot idea by players or other people before you implement them?
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty straightforward answer.
I'll tell this, and even I don't think it's too much of a spoiler. I asked the Warlock players, like, hey, how would you feel about like just changing patrons like all of a sudden? You know, like if you went back on your pact with your fiend, but you had another better patron who was like there waiting, hypothetically, you know, would you say yes? So
I think it's very, I wouldn't say it's like an understood underground thing to do, but if it's going to affect a player, definitely let your players kind of get a heads up on it. You don't want to throw some things like that to players, especially when players are extremely finicky about specifics. A oops moment of my own as I was a early game master. I had a player who wanted to play a chaotic evil or a lawful evil Warforged, and when he gained his order his oath, it was the only time I had stated that he was spoken to by his patron or his deity, and he turned off. And it became this huge thing. Like, he was so mad at me that I did not tell him that, because he's like, Warforged don't turn off. They don't close down. They don't shut off at all. And at the end of it, I kind of looked at him and I said, I apologize. I didn't realize this was such a big deal. I want you to think about this, though. A god spoke to you. This isn't just an everyday thing, but it actually became an underlying issue that broke that party apart over time, which I was like, wow. I think there were more to it with that specific character, but that was the one thing that he very bluntly told me. He's like, my character doesn't sleep. It's like, okay, noted. So yeah, if it's gonna affect the character, check with the character or check with the player first, please. I can say that. I mean, unless you are really good friends with a character or with a player and they trust you, that's different.
Yeah, I think you have a different realm too, because you're doing a lot of games where I'm pretty sure you're still doing the, where you have players jumping on and you're facilitating and hosting games, so it's all new players. Whereas if you're getting, especially a new DM, if you're getting into a campaign with people, maybe try a one shot with them, see how they game, see how, I don't know, their personalities, right? Like, we can work through stuff, but I love dropping the reveals. Like, I will, and if they have that mutual respect, they understand that, we can play God in the game. Like, as DMs, honestly, like, we want some crazy stuff to happen. And so, if a Warforged turns off, wow, this is never heard of in the history of Warforges, this must be significant. Like, this is awesome. Like, play it,
Right. And
hopefully a player could have some grace in that. Especially if you're a new DM and you don't know all the races right away. Not that you didn't, but you got to have grace at the table. Like
I said, I was absolutely shocked because it didn't. The other thing that killed me with it was they were sleeping in a very protected area. What I do is I do monologues for any time they gain a new ability to their class, kind of giving them a reason behind it. And it's always done usually in the evenings. Either they're reminiscing about something or they're studying over time. But they were getting their oath, which I thought I would flare up and make it sound really cool. And turns out it was not very cool because they were not happy with me. Yeah, those are things you have to learn through experimentation. But if I can somehow save somebody from having to deal with that would be my only bet. Now, they want to kind of have us go a little bit more in depth with this question. So, to what degree do you keep, or do you ask players information or other people?
For me, if I'm going to share, I always do share a little bit about plot. I share a little bit about the world, the setting, the foundations, what I'm building on. But I think one thing I always try to remember is it's a collaborative story, and the story's not about the setting. The story's about the heroes, right? So that's really the story you're telling. You're telling the story of the other people who are at the table that is taking place in the foundations of this world that you created. So what I won't share is I'm not going to share plot twists until the reveal. I'm not going to share anything that has a good reason to be kept secret, but I'll definitely share the feel of the game, the idea of where it's headed. Even I might even say, hey, you're trying to bring back this lost god. I might even give them that much information, even if it goes off on a wild tangent because of the decisions that they make. I want to have them have a feel for which to create their characters from. But then once the game's going, man, I interact with them a lot. I do a lot of back and forth aside from the game, trying to figure out what they want for their characters, how they feel about the way the plot is going, so I can make corrections if I need to in my own storytelling for their enjoyment. So I would say it's hard to overshare. Just keep those few pieces of core information that you want for a big reveal close to your heart. But everything else, like, it's not just your story, it's the whole party story.
So to caveat on that, before I let anybody else speak, because this kind of helps, this will add to this question. Do you prefer to give your players do you prefer to get your players' characters' backstories first, or do you prefer to build the world and plotline first? And I think we might have lost him. Oh, he's back.
Sorry. Yeah, everybody froze, but me. I thought I was getting punked.
No, I think you really have to, like you're saying, hold it close to the. Say that last part one more time, since he's back in. That last question.
Sure. Do you prefer to get your players' characters and backstories first, or do you prefer to build the world and the initial plot first?
Yeah, I mean, doing a homebrew and not even having the players in concrete yet of who was able to be at the table, because it took me like a year to build this out, and it wasn't every detail. I have learned, you don't need to build out every NPC, every town. As they go, you go, and as they shift, you shift. But I absolutely will include all of their backstory, almost all of their backstory, in some way, shape, or form. I have 6 players at the table. Each session, I try to maybe include like a little flair. I'll drop something in. It brings people's attention. It doesn't have to be every player, every session. Like here and there, I'll drop that in. But I think you could do it either way. You could take their backstory and build off of that, but I kind of give them a premise first of what the realm is going to be, what's going on in the realm. So it's a general idea, maybe some of the main kingdoms, so they can say that they're from those kingdoms if they want to elaborate on their backstory a little bit more that way. That's my approach, at least.
I have tried it both ways. So with our first campaign, I set up the world first, and then we had our session 0 where I had, like, beforehand I'd emailed out like a little cheat sheet about, like, significant historical events, recent historical events, kind of like the state of the world, and I'd even like made like specific ideals and bonds related to like certain classes, or certain like people in certain factions might have this bond or this ideal or this flaw, so they could like really plant their character like in the world. So I did all of that beforehand. Then we had our session 0 and everybody was talking about like, you know, would it make sense for this character to know this or to be able to do that? And it was a lot of fun. And then with the God's Eye, I had like kind of like the story idea, but not so much the world. And then I said to the players, you create your characters and your backstories, and then I'll make the world sort of using a lot of what you're bringing to the table. And it made my job a bit easier, but I've also kind of like saddled myself with a huge potential problem. Like if one of them dies, you know, so much of the story is kind of like resting like very heavily on their shoulders, you know? So
Yeah.
I think that's a very good point. I'm trying to remember which blogger said it, but I was just reading it recently. They said, always start your session small and only have the plan for that session. Because if you're planning too far ahead, a character could always die, right? But have a plan for every session that you go into. And again, I always harp on my show over and over again, is like you're building the world around the heroes. You're not trying to shape the heroes to fit your world. So I would just say, yeah, just keep your characters in mind before every session. And if something happens where you have to change it, don't plan so far ahead that you're like screwing yourself over on how much time you spent doing that.
No, I completely agree. I think in most cases that's pretty much where you want to kind of give that balance, making sure that every player feels like they have not only just they're not in the story, but they're actually a part of the story. You want to make sure that you give that those moments and those times where specifically backstories, you want to touch on those consistently because people need to feel like they're part of the world. This might be going out of the normal. How do you feel about modules then? So modules have a lot of this detail already built into it. So if a player is given or if a game master prepares a module, and the reason I'm saying this is because with a lot of newer game masters, they're going to pick up a module and they're going to run a module. What guidance would you give them to make sure that their players feel like they are a part of that module without giving too much away?
I'm gonna have to let you guys go on this one. I'm homebrew pretty much based, so
Yeah,
same here.
my primary recommendation to any DM, whether you're new or not new, is to homebrew. But that being said, I have run quite a few modules, so I've been through them, and I've played in a lot of modules too. And I think the one real thing about modules that is great is if you get a group of people together tonight and you want to play a game, like you've got all the information there to just start going. And but it's not a custom fit unless you make it a custom fit, right? Like if you're running a module that's all about, you know, arcane secrets and all this stuff, but you've got a bunch of people who want to play rogues and clerics who have no interest in the arcane, it's not a very good fit for the story.
Right.
So modify your modules. I would say that is probably the biggest thing. If something doesn't really seem like it fits your heroes, then change it. Like once you've purchased a module, you have whatever freedom and liberty you want to do whatever the hell you want with it. So if the story doesn't make sense for the characters you've got playing it, change it a little. It's pretty easy to do. You still have most of the monsters. You can change names, you can change places, and make it fit pretty well just with a little bit of tailoring. So I think that would be my recommendation is still take that time before each session and say, okay, here's what the module has planned. How's that going to fit the people who are playing in my game?
that's awesome. Yeah, I didn't know that along the lines of you can tailor it to yourself, just use it as like a base foundation. With combat RP interactions, yeah, if you can tailor that, I guess maybe what the players expect, like, oh, I've ran this module before, I want to run the same one again, like
Yeah.
I guess, or if they know that you can kind of add your flavor onto it, that sounds pretty cool.
And we've run, like, there's one module we run out of Pathfinder. We ran the same module 3 times, and each time it was a completely unique experience.
Nice.
And some of the same players, like they've come out of that game going, holy cow, that was like nothing like the first story. And I think that's really important too, because you can listen to anybody playing Curse of Strahd online, right now. So you can have all the spoilers and all of the plot twists already.
And it'll never be the game you run.
That's exactly right. And you want it to be your own. So put your own twist on it. Like they were saying, right? Twist.
Yeah. No, 100%.
Yeah.
It's kind of where I gained most of my higher level experience when starting to run with new players and running for people, of all types. When running modules, I tell people all the time, I was like, I don't care how much you research this thing, you won't know everything. Like you can buy the book. I don't care. It doesn't bother me. Because you'll never see it all in black and white like the book has it. And for new game masters who are kind of dabbling into homebrew, you're in this like middle ground between, I don't really want to build a world, but I don't want to just run a module out of the book. Look into those areas in the modules that give like paragraphs. Those are great places for you to come up with an idea and go, I can build on this, I can run this. And then you have an entire arc or an entire series of stories that you have the basic guidelines for everything. You have the world already, you have the other towns that are nearby, the main NPCs of the world, the overarching tone of the world. But now you have something that's yours. Now you have something that nobody else is ever going to ever see. And no matter how much they study, a big example is there's many places in the jungles of Chult during the Tomb of Annihilation game where I would read I'm like, okay, so they're taking this direction down this river, they're going to hit this place, and I go look into the book and go, okay, there's nothing on this. Do I let them pass by, or do I find something? And sometimes it is a pass by game. Sometimes they're planning on going somewhere specifically focused, and that's okay. But sometimes they're just kind of gallivanting or throw the idea out there. Maybe it's hey, you walk into this ruined temple, you find a shrine that has a serpent on it, and there's two rubies in the eyes. What do you do? If they go, we're moving on, okay, fine. But if they don't, now you gotta be ready to do something because you gave them something that they could potentially connect with. Those are fun. That'd be my only suggestion, is definitely going to look into those paragraph moments. They're a lot of fun to just play around with, and nobody else is ever going to touch it. Let's see here. Any other new questions from the chat? Any additional information from you guys?
I'm just going to add on to that last one along the lines of storytelling. Like, it depends on the DM, right? Like you had mentioned what they want to do, and you can have a combination of both. Me personally, and I didn't find this out until later, but my creative outlet is storytelling, and I didn't know that until I started DMing, and I'm like, dang, I love this. Like, the passion I get and the energy and like the time I put into it, and helping players get immersed into this world and creating a world. Like, essentially it's like creating a video game in your head, right? And you're so amped and stoked on it. So that's what I love. And I could probably run a module, if I wanted to, and I don't put modules down at all. I haven't tried them. And I would love to try it and add on to it and have players run through it. So, but it's just been a fun time homebrewing.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Jump back over to our Discord then, so we have no new questions on this end. We got a few left on Discord. This is always a fun question. This is combat. So when combat turns on the party, what are best practices? Do you add elements to allow them to recover or retreat, or do you play it till the end? Personally, my own theory, retreating is always an option. Might not be a great option, but it is always an option. Thoughts?
I think that I mean, if you're designing an encounter that you know will be hard or deadly, I think you have to, like, before any dice get thrown, you have to ask yourself, like, what are the consequences of failure? Like, if you're, most of the time, I think it works out that, like, you plan an encounter that's hard, it ends up being moderate, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's usually been my experience.
It's usually the ones you're like, they'll go right through this one and they like almost all die, and you're like, what happened?
yeah. I mean, yeah, there's just sometimes a certain combination of variables was like will add up to like a more challenging thing than you anticipated. But if you're planning from the outset that, like, yeah, this will be hard or maybe even deadly, like this is like a set piece type of encounter, yeah, ask, like, what happens if they fail? I think that has to be a question that you pose. But if there's an NPC among them, like, and the party has to retreat, like, yeah, consequences of failure, NPC makes a, like, you know, holds them off while the party regroups and stuff, and bye NPC.
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, that's one I've used before, but I didn't think about it right off the top of my head. Was, you know, the NPC is there, and sometimes when they're regrouping, now you have to, you know, one thing that would do is, depending on the NPC, that can drive an complete revenge / redemption story almost single-handedly.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you kill off you have a very loved NPC, hold off the horde of zombies and get shredded alive as the you know, the pillar drops and they're stuck behind the stone door. You know those players are coming back. Like, there's no doubt in your mind that that's the next step. How do we get back in there? How do we destroy this thing? What is going, like, you've hit that emotional tie that everyone wants to hit as a game master. When you're emotionally tying your players into the story, that's when the game gets intense, I would say. Thoughts?
I think for me, it's very similar to what was already said, like thinking through the consequences. But for me, I'm always trying to think through what is going to tell the best story. Like, is this the right moment to keep the gloves off and let there be a character death that's going to be impactful and emotional and possibly drive a revenge story or move the plot along in some really good way? Or does there need to be a method of retreat so that the party can get away and regroup and come at it again and realize that they weren't ready to face this challenge, have a character growth opportunity? But really, it is sort of that thinking through the consequences. It's finding out what tells the best story, that you're not going to have the whole party like storm out of the room pissed off at you because, you know, you just killed them all and now the campaign's over. I never want that to be the result. But I have nothing. I have no problem fudging dice rolls as a dungeon master if it's meant to be part of the story. You know, if I don't know. I go back and forth on that, because sometimes I say the dice tell the story, but other times I'm like, yeah, if that's not the story that needs to be told right now,
right.
Sometimes I won't even roll the dice, or I just won't even look at it, so I don't know what the roll really is. Like, I'll roll it for the sound effect, but I'll be like, okay, yeah, no, they definitely miss you on that one, so you do have one more action to maybe get away if you.
Yeah, for the most part, I completely agree on that. Sometimes the dice are ruthless, and other times, now I will admit though, I played with game masters and I know game masters, and I was one at one point where everything was rolled in front. You know,
Yeah.
You always saw the dice no matter what. I have moved away from that to a point. And part of that is those reasons, right? Like, you don't want, especially as a game master, you don't want to be rolling 3 20s in a row and just myrtleizing your players just because your dice are just being ruthless tonight. You know, yes, it's great, but really, is it going to tell a story that you want to tell? And is it going to tell a story that your players are going to be excited to play?
Yeah.
So that's my own thoughts on that.
Yeah,
one.
if you're running damage rolls for a freaking breath weapon that everyone failed to save on, like, okay, I'm not going to insta kill the whole part, like you're saying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Gotta
yeah,
TP.
yeah. I max, Dragon Breath comes out and you max all D8s. Like,
Yeah.
nope, not doing that.
Insta death. When I was like learning to be a DM, I watched the complete Matthew Colville like running the game series. It's like 100+ videos, and I could
Wow.
do it while walking my dog or whatever. And it had such great insight. And one of the things was have the enemy retreat. Like, what would they do in an instance, right? If they're intelligent, they're gonna attack your healers, or your casters. And then they could run to retreat to other enemies. And so I actually ran that in our campaign, and they were like, I'm like away from you in that direction towards that tomb over there. And they like in a hurry rushed and raced to like kill this freaking orc that was trying to escape, because they didn't know what the consequences were if they escaped, that was a fun aspect of running that in combat. And then always having, like, if they massacre all of them, okay, what could be looted that could progress the storyline from those bodies? Or if they don't, then they miss it. And then also, if they torture, what could be learned through torturing or capturing one of the enemies? So kind of having those in the back of my mind as what ifs for the players to access. Yeah.
Torturing consists of needing safety tools. Remind your players and your game master, safety tools are a thing. We don't just torture just to torture.
Enhanced interrogation.
Yeah, enhance.
I like that.
I think if the combat like is already happening and you as the DM can tell that it's not going your player's way, and there's like a significant chance that they could have a bad time, like start telegraphing pretty heavily like what's happening. Like you can say, oh yeah, you're all down 50%. Your enemy is looking very spry still, and you can hear that there's like metal boots clanging down the hall. Like your heroes can tell that this is a dire situation. Like, be blunt if it comes to that, so that they can make an informed choice. Like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, let's go back the way we came in. I'll drop fog cloud. We'll all get out of here and chug some healing potions, and then figure out what to do next.
Come fight another day, because we're screwed right now. Yeah. No, I complete. Everybody said amazing points here. I mean, these are, for you as a game master, these are things that you must think about when building combat encounters, especially combat encounters that you want to have meaning. The only thing I'll connect to this is kind of something that Morgan talked about with the whole, if they're intelligent, things like that. Great book. No, we're not sponsored, but Monsters Know What They're Doing is a perfectly amazing book for that specific understanding. You can get an idea based on stats what the monster might be thinking, how he might work differently, maybe the tactics behind the creatures, so that when you are building those conflicts and encounters, that you can understand more. So, if a monster gets to half health, maybe it's not sticking around. Maybe you just pissed off the bear randomly walking through the forest, and you went, I'm gonna try to shoot this thing. You shoot it, it gets pissed off, it runs at you, it gets beat up a couple times, and it dips because it's not sticking around, it's gonna die. It understands this.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Great book. I actually had Keith on my show earlier this year.
Yeah.
He was the author of those and 3 other amazing books for DMs and players. But yeah, he said the same thing on the show. Like, if you have an intelligent monster, their most important thing is protection of their life or their loot, like depending on what's the most important thing to them and what kind of creature they are. So know that going in. Like, the monster should be retreating if they're intelligent, unless they're backed into a corner and can't and have to fight to the death. They value their life just as much as your players should value their life.
And I would implore you to pick up Tyranny of Dragons and read chapter 5 or 4 for that reason. There are 3 main NPCs in that book that don't just explain who they are, but their motivation behind is ideas for you for maybe an NPC for your campaign. The only reason I say that is because, one, has a goal. One has the goal of survival. One is scared to death of its boss. So those each are going to have different ways of how they're going to battle and how long they're going to battle before they say, "Hey, I'm good. I don't want to do this no more." So just ideas. All right. Next question. Realms of role-playing. I will get to this one at the end, but we have real questions, and then we'll answer that last one at the end. It's a real question. It's just more of a, hey, what's happening next in everybody's life? We don't need to step that one just yet. 2 questions from Marvelous. Do you ever get worried when looking at some characters your players make that could either stomp through a story or significantly shred all RP moments? So high charismatic characters, characters that have been built strictly for combat that are just annihilators in that perspective. What is your thoughts on those? Or do you literally smack a player and go, no, you can't be that big? That's up to you.
Are you talking about just players or NPCs as well?
I think this is more of you as the game master. How do you deal with a player who's made a character who is just overpowering in one way or another throughout the story? Either they're overpowering in combat or they're overpowering in social encounters to the point where it's almost that's the only thing that they you can't succeed with them.
Personally, I would throw some things in there that they can't succeed on. Like if they're super strength based, I'll throw some intelligence saves, something along the lines of like purposefully like expose that, and then maybe give them some things also to go after with that as well, to give them what they want in that game.
Yeah, never penalize your players for having that OP character for that specific point. They're trying to shine in that way. Let them shine. Let them have their moments. But yeah, Morgan's right.
Yeah.
Throw the opposite at them. See how they deal with that.
Yeah, you can mix it up, hitting them where they're weak, and then so that they're having fun is like also hit them where they're really strong. Like let them use all their cool abilities. Knowing that it's not going to be that way all the time, like I have a paladin in the God's Eye campaign right now who's a great weapon master, using a great sword, and so he's built to dish out damage, and he does, and it annoys me to no end. But I also gave him a set of cursed armor, and so he can tank like bludgeoning damage, but like he's vulnerable to piercing and slashing all of a sudden. So depending on the encounter, he's either like tanking it and having a great time, or he is dropping very quickly and not having the best time. So it's a real pendulum.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Like I've had players in my group, especially new players that come into the group, that they kind of always have that concern. Is what do you do with OP players, or do you run only point by stats? Like rolling stats there's too much variation, and that kind of stuff. It kind of always drives me crazy because the DM always has the trump card, like always. And I think for new DMs, that's an important thing for you to remember. There's nothing a player can throw at you when they've created a character based on rules, and you get to run the game with whatever rules you choose. So you always have that ultimate trump card. There's always a solution that can be both fun for them, and you can still find a way to make it challenging.
And maybe it's just one character out of the crew. Like, if you're going into a bandit camp and you've got all these bandits that the paladin is going to be able to annihilate, right? But you have the sorceress in the corner that can toss slow. You've now eliminated that character for a short period of time, and now it's the goal of your other players then, if they want to get that character unlocked. So now it's a party puzzle now. So now it's now we've lost our main power. What do we do? And those can be really fun moments, and those can actually give moments of shine to other players, because now they are at that vulnerability point that you can now see happen. So let's see here.
I think
Any additionals for that?
One more thing to just add on to that would be, just because they might shine at one thing, I think one thing that stats never compensate for is like a moral dilemma. So like in your example with the paladin, if they're easily able to annihilate this bandit camp, but they find out that killing these bandits is going to leave a bunch of children in the camp parentless, like that puts a whole new spin on, yes, I could use all my abilities, but then I'm actually kind of taking an evil action, right? So that's not really then the right action for the paladin to take.
Yeah, no.
What if the paladin is Sir Lancelot from Monty Python on the Holy Grail?
Right.
He will use the holy hand grenade
Of Antioch.
Now we're hitting the heartstrings. So that's a part I didn't think about, is, flip it on them of their power, kind of, I wouldn't say against them, but let them think through that a little bit more, of if they are going through and there's this massive, I wouldn't say hungry animal of power, but at the same time give them reasons behind why they're doing what they're doing. You might slow them down a little bit, or at least have them think about things.
Yeah, I've touched on this before, but we as dungeon masters have the ability to facilitate this amazing space, this safe space, but also like hitting on each player has a different objective. Robert, you touched on this as well. Like, the bard's going to want to do something a little crazier, or whatever the case may be, and then the barbarian's just going to want to tank combat the whole time, possibly, right? So us as game masters have to balance that out in game and give each player essentially what they would want out of the game. And it's so fun, and it's like it's a good responsibility to have. And as a new game master, don't get overwhelmed by that. You'll learn it on the fly, but just have that in mind, that balance.
All right. Next question. What are your favorite classes to game master with? I don't know if I fully follow this, but like, which classes do I use for? Because I use them all. Like, and a lot of mine classes, I don't have classes. Monsters and NPCs. Is there any specific class that you like to pull as kind of like high NPC or like antagonist that has kind of like you're drawn to?
I don't know. Like, it's weird. I don't really think about my my villains as like having a class,
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, here's another question then for Game Master. Do you create stat blocks as monsters, or do you create stat blocks as as player characters for your villains?
I do it as a PC. If I want something that's going to stand up against a group of PCs, then I think they have to be built with the same amount of detail and the same amount of attention as an actual PC. Because I think otherwise, pulling a stat block, it's fine for regular monsters, but for your big bad villain, I just don't think it stands the test of a really true combat.
Yeah, in the 1-shot / 8-shot, it started in Halloween, and so it was a town that was overrun by vampire lords, and I mean, essentially, I took those two main villains from Critical Roles. You know who I'm talking about?
Yep.
Briarwood Art. Yeah, and so essentially same powers, but Lord Briarwood, I pretty much took Strahd's stat block, nerfed it a little bit in certain areas, put a little flavor on it in certain other ones that tied in with the storyline, and it was fun. But I think a little bit of both for that one.
And Tim's gonna be like, I don't use stat blocks.
I mean, yeah, no, I just kind of default to use it like making a monster stat blocks for my big bad. But you know, maybe I'll try it the other way for this campaign, because there's a pretty big encounter coming up to where we are now with a certain Queen of Shadows that the party's been squaring up against. So yeah, I'll give that a shot.
Yeah, no. The only thing I would kind of hesitate on creating as a player character is remember that monster stats are built on four player characters at one level, player characters one character level, or player character at one level. So thinking through that might be a little more difficult, but it could still work. I think I would do more so what Morgan does, and I would go in and I'd find a very prominent NPC character and an area that I think my players will be around, and then start manipulating from there. Now, I usually do try to take classes, abilities, and things like that from player characters, but I don't do it to the point where I create the player character actual stat block. So, kind of in the middle. But I got the question all wrong, so we're going to try this again. So what he was going for is what classes do you like your players to play as game masters, kind of in the aspect of, ooh, I have something for this. What is your favorite one to have your players play that you can twist and contort and manipulate to your own?
I think character class doesn't mean anything to me. Give me a good backstory.
Yeah.
If I've got a character that's got a really well developed backstory, I can build a story around that. I can tell a great tale with a group of people that has great backstories. But if they give me nothing, it doesn't matter what class you are, I have nothing to go on.
That's similar to both of you?
No, I mean, if I were to choose one, I would say a low intelligence meathead would be great. Like, you can give them cursed items. You can have them prevent the tavern to start trouble. Like, it's fun to mess with.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally agree about having players with like a fleshed out backstory. Honestly, like that's an interesting question though. Like I'd never even thought about that. Like, but yeah, I can't think of like a certain type of class that like bothers me. If the player's coming with like a backstory and like I know that they're invested and they're there to enhance the experience of everyone at the table.
Right. Yeah, no, and I know he's a player of mine, so I know where he's coming from with this, because certain classes, I'll pull specifically based on their class. So like if they're clerics, paladins, warlocks, anything that has a higher being to it, I like to play on that so that people can feel that there's more to this puzzle than just themselves. Now, I have went over and beyond that on another game of mine where everybody has a higher being, and this was an intensity that I had never expected to have to deal with until I realized that I opened up Pandora's box, because every higher being has its own prerogative, and now we've got players going towards a goal, but at the same time against each other. Now, before I go, don't do this in a normal case. All the players talked about this, and we talked very closely. I talked very closely with the players before I implemented this. So I don't think it's for every table, but it has been fun so far. They're all chaotic evil people, or they're all evil characters, so they already had their own agendas. I just made it more higher powered. So yeah, it's intense. And we're moving into the last step of that puzzle here once I reinitiate that adventure. Yeah, that's my only thought on that one. But yeah, no, backstories is where I pull 90% of my, I can use this. That's my thought process too. Let's see here. I thought I missed one question here before we go to the final question. Realms of Role Playing says, what is your favorite monster or mechanic you like to include in your campaigns?
Favorite monster or mechanic? Darn, how do you narrow it down?
Something that has to, I mean, in all honesty, for me personally, I don't really have a favorite monster or mechanic. It has to do with where we're at in the story for myself, because I can't just pin it down, because if we're in a, I love playing these specific monsters, but if we're in the middle of the snow and they don't make any sense in the snow, they might get manipulated, but most likely I'm finding something that would make more sense in the environment that it's in. Doesn't mean I'm not going to have like a snow troll, because why not? But
I think I have to lean towards, what I've seen, what I've played, and the world that I've created. It could be different for any world, but I think dragons and giants are like your typical, like pretty rare, maybe at one time ruled the realm. There maybe were many at one time and there's none anymore, like, and kind of showing glimpses of that, like even just a shadow going over their head and they think they see wings on the ground and it passes by, or something ominous bringing it up. Having those monsters kind of in the realm gives a flair, I feel like. Something.
Well, it gives you that feeling that you're much smaller than this realm than you thought you were.
Yes.
The first time a dragon flew over a party of mine, and they were like, "What happened?"
Yeah. Characters soiled themselves.
Yeah. Giants are another fun one. One thing somebody challenged me on a few years ago when creating a world is like, when you have creatures this big, where the hell do they go? Like, you don't have a community of giants. Like, a community is 12, not 60. You have 60 giants, you've taken over half a continent. Like, this is how this works. They're too big. And I think that kind of makes, you have to kind of take those large creatures and chunk them out of, like, what is their mentality of the entire, I mean, if you introduce those types of creatures, they almost influence an entire ecosystem. It's not just like one or two things. Not to mention, I think if you and this is kind of something that I thought about just off the top of my head, if it's a creature that you buy a mini for, that you only think you're going to use once, you need to come up with a reason why the creature is in the world in the first place. I'm never buying, or I'm going to one day, I know I will, the like $500 Tiamat, so I can drop it on my table once. One time, ever. And then it's going to go up on my shelf and look amazing for the rest of it. Yeah, but I'm going to drop it once, and then I'll never see it again in my table, unless I run, another high-level dragon adventure. So, yeah, think through those.
I think for me, I can give you both. I'll give you a mechanic and a monster. For me, the best monster in my mind is always the human. And I think the reason for that is we have sort of an instinctive understanding of how evil humans can be. And we've seen it in our real world. So there's something about it that I think we can just identify with, because we know sort of like the darkness that happens inside all of our own minds, right? So I think there's just a level of understanding that makes it believable and really sort of visceral when you have a really great villain who's something you identify with. But as far as a mechanic goes, 4th edition had this amazing mechanic, which I have brought into every other game that I run, which is the skill challenge mechanic. They're phenomenal. They make doing little things like breaking into a keep or trying to track somebody down in a city so much more fun and so much more fluid. And they get everybody at the table involved instead of just making that like a social encounter about one person, which is, I think, the best part about them.
So because I know a lot of people who are 5th edition players, can you go into a little more detail on that mechanic for people? So if they want to use that mechanic in their own game, what that look like?
Yeah, so basically what it is a skill challenge is essentially think combat for skills. But for an example, like one thing that we had to do was the party was trying to navigate a horse-drawn wagon across a narrow mountain path. Now, you could just say, how are you doing this, and have the party roll, but if you initiate a skill challenge, what that does is you start initiative order, just like you were in combat, and then each person in initiative order has to use a skill or an attack action or some character ability on their initiative order to progress that piece of the story along. The DM sets DCs for it, and there's a certain number of successes you have to have as a party before a smaller number of failures. So whether or not the challenge is successful or fails. Ours in that example failed. Like, we had all the party rolled terribly. The skill challenge failed and the wagon went tumbling off the side of the mountainside. But, people are doing things like doing a handle animal check to try and keep the horses calm on the narrow passage. And somebody's doing a profession driver check to try and navigate along the road. One person's scouting on up ahead with a perception check to see if there's any other dangers in the way. But it just goes around the table, taking everybody's turn in order, and lets everybody be involved in completing the task.
No, I like that. Only thing I can share with that, because like I said, 4th edition was kind of the edition I skipped over, and it had nothing to do with 4th edition. People, I know lots of downfall against 4th edition for a lot of people. I have no recollection of it, so I can't say yes or no if I would like it or not. I was just time of my life. I went from 3rd to 5th. That's kind of how it happened. Now, what I will say though is there are other games out there that you might want to look into that they quantify this a little bit differently. The only reason I say this is because the One Ring from Free League Gaming has come up with an amazing way of doing discovery and social encounters with this specific skill set. And it's based on how hard the skill set is, bases on how many times you have to succeed compared to fail.
Yeah.
So if it's an average skill set, it's 3 and 3 or 6 and 6, whichever way you want it, depending on your party group. So it's the same amount. If it's a hard skill set, you have to actually succeed. You can only fail half of the amount of time.
Yep.
If it's a easy skill check, you only have to succeed half of the time. And it just kind of broke it down a little more quantified, and usually it's 3. So like on average, if you succeed 6 times before you fail 6 times, you succeed. In a hard check, if you fail 3 times before you succeed 6, then you fail.
Right.
And vice versa for the easy. Just another thought of how you might want to play those skill checks out. But yeah, no, I think skill check is a skill challenge, which up until like less than 2 years ago, I didn't even know that's where that came from. I had just heard it once and I was like, this sounds great, I'll use this.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I developed it.
They're awesome.
And so
It sort of reminds me of like the ticking clock mechanic in like from Blades in the Dark. Where so you Blades in the Dark is a game about doing heists repeatedly, and you have a crew of scoundrels. And so a ticking clock is a way to gauge progress towards certain things, and also like a ticking clock can be keeping track of like consequences, because the mechanics in that is like you fail or you succeed with a consequence. Fail, succeed with a consequence, or succeed outright, no negative consequence. Right. So if you succeed with a consequence, like, okay, I'm going to try to sneak through this hallway, you succeed with a consequence. All right, the consequence is I'm going to start a ticking clock that has six segments. It's more like a pie chart, I guess. But it's like, okay, the consequence is that there's this ticking clock and I'm filling in one segment, and like this clock is called high alert. And so like if you mess up enough times, like once this clock fills up, everybody in this place is on high alert. So it's like if you fail a stealth check, it's not like everybody all of a sudden like knows that you're there. You know, it's like,
Right.
okay, well, if you do really poorly, it's like, okay, there's a 6-segment clock, half of it's filled up because you biffed this one roll. And so it also has like the tangential benefit of like you telling your players, and it stresses them out to know that it's there. And I've been using this in a few sessions lately, and like it's been great just to tell them that, like, okay, here's your progress on this. Like, people are starting to get suspicious of like how you're acting. So there's this ticking clock about suspicion. Like, if you fill this up, people are going to know that you're up to something. So that's a mechanic that I've.
So what would you take as a fail then for that? Like, what would happen in the ticking clock if you just outright failed?
Oh, I mean, an outright fail, I guess. I guess it would depend on what you're trying to do. Like, if you're trying to stealth, and it's an outright failure, then you could say, okay, it's a 4-segment clock, and I've filled up 3 segments, so like that's a pretty bad consequence. Or maybe it's like, okay, 1 guard is alerted, and they're gonna call for backup, but you have to do something about it right now, sort of thing. So yeah, I have never run Blades in the Dark as much as I want to, but I have stolen that mechanic.
Hey, like we said, steal from everywhere.
Yep.
Part of the
Absolutely.
game. You know, there's mechanics for everything. There's skills for, there's monsters for all over the world and all over the fantasy thing. Everywhere. Just steal from everything. It's great. Yeah, let me make sure. I think we cleared. Okay. Let's see. But no, I think that was a good ending to like the mechanic ideas. That skill challenge is so unique because it can be anything. You know, it can be running out of the town and while you're being chased. Anything that would have to do with multiple skills and having your party as a group now working together to come up with the idea. Because it's so much fun to see what people are going to do, especially when there's the only thing I've never done with it that I'm going to implement from now on is initiative roll. I think that is perfect. Yep. I love that idea.
It just fosters cohesion, I think, which is great.
Yeah. So for the players that are listening tonight, prepare. I will add. I'm adding to this. Let's see. I think real quick, I don't want to miss any questions before we hit our final question for the evening. If I missed a question, please retype it in chat. I'm going to go through and answer our last question from... I think it's... Oh no, all of our questions have been answered. Goodness gracious. It's never a case. I never had this happen. All right. Really, if you're a brand new dungeon master, or if you have recently taken up the mantle and you have those really confusing, easy questions that you're like, these guys are talking way over our head, throw those questions out. We want to answer those too. A lot of those questions are questions that new game masters need to have answered. And we're hopefully here to give some guidance to make it your table a little easier. But while we're waiting on the final questions, let's go to Realm's question of what is next? Any sneak peeks, insider information about what is coming up for any projects by everyone? So we'll kind of go around the circle here. Robert, you start?
Yeah, I think probably biggest thing on my horizon is I'm really close to finishing my master's in psychology, so that's a big accomplishment. It's less than 6 months away now, so
that's awesome.
Nice. And then as far as my show goes, the next big guest who I've been in contact with and we're scheduling right now is Sean K. Reynolds, so that is something pretty cool to look forward to.
Awesome. Not to mention, Robert and I have been talking about writing together. But
yes.
That is in the future due to life.
Yeah.
Tim.
What's coming up? So I was just at the Toronto Comic Con a couple weeks ago, giving hosting a few panels on intro to D&D and intro to DMing, which was a lot of fun. Next up on the horizon in May, mid-May, close to the end of May, our 5th anniversary as a podcast, which is kind of blows my mind.
Awesome.
So we'll probably do a giveaway or something special, but yeah,
Awesome.
that's coming up soon.
That's amazing. All right, Morgan.
Yeah, our campaign 2 is starting in Evermore in June, so super excited about that. 3 returning players, 3 new players, so there may be more actually, and then some guest appearances. So stoked on that. Our book, part 1 of our campaign, pretty much turned our campaign into a book. At least the first arc so far. So I'm super grateful. Is going to Amazon soon. So I've requested a proof for them. It's been fully edited. Super grateful. It's been a journey for the last couple of years trying to remember what characters did, and I've given them credit as co-authors on this because they've created what happens in this realm and this world. So really cool, really fun, excited. And then later on in the year, we're going to have possible video game alpha testing for Evermore. So
Awesome.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not going to say that I haven't seen some sneak peek stuff, and it's pretty cool. Not going to lie.
Thanks, man. I'm grateful.
Yeah, man. Hey, you guys everybody's doing amazing things, and I'm over here just shouting everybody else out because, we are. What's the Misfits got going on this year? So everybody I know is really excited. In May, we were going to launch our next adventure in the Avatar Legends RPG. However, our game master, due to switching jobs and life being just what life is, had to step down from that endeavor. So instead, we are going to. I'm going to hand over my reins to one of my closest players that have been playing on the stream since day one. Matt, who plays Sigismund in Plots in Darkenhaven. He plays Ferdinand in The One Ring. He played Dell in The Affordables. He is going to be taking over Game Master, and we are going to be doing an actual run through of The Darkest Dream Chapter 1 from GUI Cube with all of the the imagery, the maps, everything, and that will be starting in May instead of the Avatar adventure. So, and I will get to play. So I'm excited. As for me specifically, you can find me in August at Gen Con, where I'll be running Plots in Darkenhaven games. I'll be running a couple episodes from that have been altered to let others play. We did a game test on that in Genghis Con in February, and it went amazing. And we used the last game board along with some cool just 3D pieces to add to it to really just flare up the adventure. It was a lot of fun. And then talk has started for people to get excited about. We're going to start interviewing for guests here soon. Plots in Darkenhaven Season 2 will launch after Gen Con this year. So that'll be our Season 2 of that program. Other than that, I am about 2 months away from my IT certification, so that's where my life has been busy right now.
Nice.
Life has to take a forefront sometimes, but other than that, I'm just gonna keep gaming and enjoying and meeting all these amazing people, because that's my luxury, is that I get to talk to all cool people. So, and hopefully we can do some sort of charity event here in the spring/summer, bringing some of these awesome guests to either come GM for us or to play with us, because it stinks, I have to say. I have met so many amazing people through Tavern Talks. I really have, but I've only got to play with a very, very, very small amount of them And I think that is just a travesty on my own part that I've never been able to play with these people, because that's where we all really enjoy the game, is when we're behind the table and rolling dice. So I hope everybody enjoyed our first roundtable on game mastering. Please, if you are a new game master and this is something that you're interested in hearing more about, let me know. Come hang out in our Discord. We have a channel completely built strictly for Tavern Talks, so you can ask your questions, talk to everybody in the channel. We're super nice, I promise. And yeah, no, it's been really fun. I do appreciate it. And once again, thank you to Robert, Morgan, and Tim. He's got a name on here, and it's not Tim, and I catch his tongue every time I want to say his name. No, thank you guys for taking your time, energy to come hang out and talk Game Masters tips and tricks. I learned something new tonight, so that was awesome.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
just, a lot of fun.
Last thing, just everybody around the table, where can they find you guys so that they can go see your stuff? Robert, go.
You can find the podcast on basically any platform. It's the Dungeons, Dragons, and Psychology podcast. Also, you can find me on Instagram, Dungeons_Dragons_Psychology. There's a Linktree link there to basically all of my socials. And you can find my book, Session Zero, the DMG to Writing Great Campaigns in Any System, on Amazon.
Ooh. Yes, I have both books.
Nice.
Amazing. Tim.
So the Knights and Nerds podcast is on basically anywhere you listen to podcasts. On social media, we're at Knights and Nerds on Instagram. What else? knightsandnerds.com if you want to stream them there, I guess. But yeah, we have a fully our first campaign is done, 60 episodes. And we have 2 campaigns running concurrently right now. And the actual play episodes are interspersed with my sort of behind the screen updates of hey, here's what went wrong, what I was planning and didn't come to fruition. So here's what I'll try to pivot to, which is always interesting. So for any, I like to do those for aspiring DMs or new DMs who want to get a peek of what not to do. They can listen to me.
Listen to me too. Morgan, where can they find you?
Yeah, Instagram, Heroes of Evermore. You guys can find us there. Reach out if you have any questions. Obviously, DM advice. Happy to help. One of the things that kind of sets us apart is as James said, is our immersion. I love to immerse the players, break that forth, and just bring some real life science elements. Fire, smoke, ice, things like that. So I love it. And Robert, Tim, James, I respect you guys. Can't wait to collab in the future possibly, but love everything you guys are doing.
Absolutely. Feelings mutual.
For sure.
Last but not least, let me grab this because sadly our other guest, Dungeon Boys, has been getting shouted out all night, which they're amazing people, but their game master had to run off to work and was unable to make it. All right, so for me, you can find me everywhere at Tabletop Misfits. I am on Instagram, Twitch, YouTube, all those fun places. But you can see us on Wednesdays at the show, and you can see us on Sunday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Twitch. And we're going to continue to tell ridiculous stories through the worlds of Middle-earth, or if you have not been tuning in these last 2 weeks, we are playing a new game when everything hits the fan, and that is called Kick Ass and Chew Bubblegum. There is only 2 rules. You either kick ass or you chew bubblegum. And it is completely improv, 100%. Everything is made up on the fly. And it has been a lot of fun, extremely wacky. And though I do believe I did a decent job last week, our new game master, Matt, does an absolutely incredible job at improv, and we give him all the credit for that one. So, hope everybody enjoyed our roundtable. If you did, please give us a shout out on Instagram or on YouTube so we know we want to do more of these. Give us ideas of what you want to see for roundtables. And until then, check out next week as a new player comes in with a new adventure and a new story to tell. I'll see you guys all next week on Tavern Talks. Have a good night.